a new study out by OpenAI where they looked at real world tasks and how well a bunch of different LLMs could do it. So they looked at 1,300 tasks across 44 occupations. These were tasks that would take a human about, on average, 7 hours to complete. And what I love about this study is that they used human evaluators and human people to set up the tasks. So they hired people who had an average of 14 years of experience in their industry. And those people defined these tasks, and it went through an average of 5 rounds of definition of the task. And they were just like all these different things. I obviously dug into the writing ones. They had someone write an editorial and someone write a blog post about different things. But, they were in like all sorts of industries. And the output was things from blog posts to PowerPoint presentations, and Excel spreadsheets and all the different kinds of outputs you can imagine. So they had the expert humans look at the output from the human and the AI and say which one did better. And well, first of all, Claude won almost every matchup. ChatGPT-5 with high reasoning was a close second, but I thought it was really cool that OpenAI released this study even though they didn't win. That was nice. So 48% of the time, Claude Opus 4.1 did as good as or better than the human on the task. Um, you know, Pretty high number.
Very high number. And that human, so a few different things you said that really struck me. So one is this whole idea of experts providing a language and a framework for evaluating, right? So you could imagine like just, I don't know, creating an image or creating a paragraph of prose or whatever and showing it to 100 random people, and that would be interesting too. But here they had experts in that field define the terms. And actually, when I did this Notebook LM project, it was around, I have like you do, a long history in podcasting. And it was around like how to bring in an expert in podcasting to help them think about their audio tool, which people call their podcasting tool. And I had in my head, like, oh, I'm a really good editor and I really have a sense of how to structure an episode. And what they kept saying, the most valuable thing I did was actually not a way I think of myself as adding value. It was just the terms I used. It was just helping them understand how podcasters talk, or at least the podcasters in the world I come from talk, and define success and define and diagnose problems, etc. So it was broad things like explaining that, we talk about highly edited and highly produced podcasts versus live to tape podcasts. We talk about, or at least I talk about, like informative podcasts versus vibe podcasts. But then getting more in the nitty gritty. How do we talk about a story that's really working? How do we describe a story that's not working so well? That maybe the stakes aren't high enough or scenes aren't well motivated. And that kind of language they found really helpful. That generally the LLM did know that language, but it also knew a whole lot of language, right? It knew every possible way of doing a podcast. And by including all the maybe less effective ways or just differently effective ways. And so by getting, if I can call myself an expert, getting expert terminology, expert framing, they felt it really helped them elevate the work. In a way, it was a bit of a bummer because I felt like, well, everybody knows that stuff, at least within the field. But and I think this question of expertise in the LLMs is just a big question for the foreseeable future, because this paper isn't just saying we don't need experts, the LLMs can just do it all.
No.
It's saying the experts provide an insight that allows us to understand the LLMs better, to nudge them in the right direction. It certainly raises some of the perennial questions we've had for the last couple of years. Weird to say perennial about something that's barely exists. But will we get experts if we don't have people like slaving away? Like, I feel like I learned how to write like just by writing badly and getting reprimanded, and then and it feels more like muscle memory than like a thing I learned and consciously. And so there are all of those questions embedded here. But there's also the question of like, is this, essentially bad for people that Claude in this case is better than almost half of people? Maybe that's certainly on the table, but also it might just mean people are doing a different level of work. If you imagine that, in my mind, talking about writing and editing, in my career, I went from being a writer of short articles to a writer of longer articles, a reporter of short radio stories to longer radio stories. Eventually, I ran Planet Money, and then I ran a whole podcast company, and I was and that to me was enjoyable. Not everyone wants to go up into management, but that's what I start to picture with these ideas that the LLMs can produce human level work, is that the human being in that recipe, or at least one of the roles of a human being, is thinking at that higher level. Like, what is the whole portfolio of things we want? How are we going to just define good? How are we going to define success? That ends up meaning every individual gets their own podcast, but there is some kind of curated, edited framework with which the LLM's working. That person or those people who are defining that might be way more valuable than the human being they replace. And
Yeah.
I don't know how the numbers work out. I don't know if that means everyone gets a good job, but it definitely challenges how we think about work for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, a couple things that stood out to me are that, it was really important to define the tasks so clearly. Also, a lot of the tasks required uploading a lot of documents that provided context, background information, and things like that. And when they didn't give it quite as much of that background information, when they said, and go out and find this information on your own, it did worse. And one thing I had to sort of dig into and think through for myself is like, okay, well, if it's still failing like more than half the time, like how is that helping anyone, right? You're still getting a lot of junk out, but they did some measurement of, well, okay, what if it's right 36% of the time and then the rest of the time someone still has to go in and clean it up. They said it was still 40% faster. But people don't like doing that cleanup work. I have seen so many posts from writers complaining about, and editors, how now they have to clean up this AI slop, and it's frustrating and hard and they hate it. So, I think people are going to be shunted, some people, into this work that is much less enjoyable. I remember reading a post about a coder who said he discovered that once he started using AI for coding, he couldn't listen to music anymore while he was working. Because he wasn't getting into that flow state of coding anymore. He was doing essentially an entirely different kind of work. And it was maybe faster, but it wasn't, as rewarding as he felt like it had been
Yeah.
before. But then if it
And that
Go ahead.
No, no, sorry. I don't mean to interrupt.
No, and then but if it measurably is faster, people are gonna be managers are gonna want people to do that work.
Yeah, it's and that's something like I often discourage companies from thinking just in terms of speed, efficiency, productivity, because it I mean, there are applications where that's exactly what you want, of course. But if that's all you think about, you're sort of locking yourself into what's being done now. Look, it's inherently backwards looking. And when I talk to, there's a lot of study of the impact of technology over in the past. It's a big topic in economics, for example. And generally, the most impactful change is the new things that are made possible, not the old things that are made faster. We didn't go from horses to trucks and just say we're going to do the exact same routes. We did drive faster and farther, but we like rebuilt the entire country, rebuilt entire economic systems around this thing, for good and for ill. So I think there will be cases where a tiny bit better quality is going to matter a lot. Like, I don't know, a Super Bowl ad or a really great novel or whatever. but there also are a lot of places where, I mean, writing is pretty terrible in corporate America, I would say, and
Yeah.
writing is pretty terrible in nonprofits. Like, like, I would say most of the messages I receive, you know, are pretty badly written. And so if this is what I try and talk myself through, is the question is not just, oh, there's X number of people writing today, AI can do that work, so there's going to be X minus Y number of people writing. It could be that there's lots of writing that's pretty terrible and that'll be elevated. It could be that that kind of the base level of writing quality goes higher, and so we need, so writing is more valuable. Podcasting's a great example where, when I started in radio, I was at NPR. There was only, I don't know, maybe a few dozen people in the country who had spent a significant part of their career creating like hour long form discussion based radio. It just wasn't a big thing. Maybe it's a few hundred. I don't know what the number is, but and now there's just so many more people listening. There's so much more money. There's so many more jobs. It's not an exact parallel because AI can, anyway, this, because I'm a writer, you're a writer,
Mhm.
we both care about editing. This is on my mind all the time. I would think, but it's not obvious to me it's only bad for writers. It could be, and I think it's probably on balance going to be good for readers. Maybe not. I mean, there will be a lot of crap, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Of course there is. There already is. But I would guess that there already is a lot of crap. Anyway, I have no answers.
That's okay.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I mean, they did, and I just think the involvement of humans in creating the tasks, in evaluating the tasks is still really important. The other thing they tried to do in this study was they tried to use an AI evaluator for the quality. It did okay. The humans actually they had 2 humans evaluate each piece, and they agreed, like 71% of the time. And then when they had an AI and a human do the evaluation, they agreed 66% of the time. So it wasn't dramatically worse. But one thing that jumped out that was hilarious is that ChatGPT-5 preferred its own output. So when ChatGPT-5 was evaluating output from ChatGPT-5, then it disagreed far more often with the human evaluator and said, no, my work is fabulous.
That's really funny.
And this is apparently a known thing in AI. I found another paper that said that AI does tend to prefer its own output. So that's another thing to like watch out if you're trying to use automated evaluation.